to the Mark of Men. I'm your host, Michael Marks, and today we'll be talking about, you guessed it, men. Through conversations about highs and lows and everything in between, you'll learn about each guest. But more than anything, you'll learn a little bit about yourself, more the men in your life. Today's marksman is Riley Fishburn, not only a man, but the biggest fan of professional wrestling I've ever met. From parlor tricks to super kicks, we talk about why being a fan of professional wrestling is awesome, and some of the barriers that people who did not grow up with it have in appreciating the art form. It might be simulated combat, but it's still art like any ballet or play. So sit down, buckle up, and enjoy the show. Yeah! Ooh, yeah, I think it's time. Yeah, you think it's time? You think we should share?
It's always time for me, brother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, welcome. Welcome to the show. Oh, I'm so excited about today's conversation. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. There's not much that gets me more excited than the idea of sitting down with you, having a deep conversation, unless it's about my favorite topic, which it is today.
Oh, please tell me. What is that topic?
Pro wrestling, baby.
Oh, yeah. For life, baby. For life. Oh, man. Yeah, because this is how we met.
It is.
Yeah, this is the thing that actually sparked up our friendship.
We are living proof that pro wrestling brings people together.
It is, which is an overarching theme that I think we'll get to today. And one of the ways we could start is because I know, some of the people in my audience, they do traditional martial arts, right? And there's this weird relationship between martial arts and professional wrestling.
Yeah.
And people feeling like you have to be a kid in order to be a professional wrestling fan. So I think that'd be a good place to start. So I wanted to get your thoughts about, did you have to be a fan of wrestling as a child to be a fan of wrestling now? And then spiral into, do you think that wrestling is still something that, many of us can enjoy today?
Yeah, I think about all the friends that I've had over the years who I have tried to interest in wrestling because it's something that's so important to me and something that I love so much. I can't help but want to share that love with everybody that I love. And I've noticed there does seem to be a block there. There's a lot of dudes, and when I say dudes, that's not a gendered term, but it is mostly men who wrestling is marketed at, and men who were watching it and aware of it when we were kids in the 90s. There's a lot of dudes who seem to have a block about watching it as an adult if they didn't at least lay the framework as a child. Mm-hmm. If you were into it as a kid and then you grow up, you get interested in other things, you don't watch it anymore, there's always a chance you can get sucked back in. Mm-hmm. But if you didn't get introduced to it as a child, you might have just missed the boat.
Right.
That's what I've found anyway.
Yeah. Which makes sense, right? Because I know over the years as a wrestling fan, I came in and went out again as different things within the wrestling business kind of took place. And for a while, there was only one place to go to watch wrestling, and that it seemed like the product they were putting out there was geared for a younger audience.
Yeah.
But, how have you been able to preserve your fanhood for so long?
Well, I have not been actively watching wrestling my whole life. What you're describing about kind of getting disinterested in it, I think that's a very common pattern. I think it has a lot to do with just growing up, Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's aimed at children. It definitely welcomes a younger audience. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the crowd, especially today, it's mostly adults.
Yeah.
If you look at the crowd in Japan, it's all adults.
Right.
So but there's the middle ground in there, right? Where you're maybe late teens. For me, it was really college. Is a combination of I'm in college, I'm trying to get my degree, I'm too busy to engage with pro wrestling. But then there was also a little bit of a, I'm too cool for this. This is something that I used to like when I was a little kid, and so ergo it must be for kids, right?
Yeah.
But then, you grow up, maybe a little bit of maturity, a little bit less self-serious, and you come back to it for the nostalgia. And then you find there's a lot more here than nostalgia. These guys aren't just reminding me of what I loved as a child. They were watching it as children too, and they've grown up and pushed it so much farther.
Right. And they've manifested the things that we loved about it as kids. They manifest that as performers. And actually, when I went through one of the hardest periods in my life, I found wrestling again. And that restored my faith in the world. It gave me something to look forward to enjoy the pageantry of it, the music, the outfits, the performance that they put on that everybody sneers at. When, there are people that'll fall off a curb and cannot cope with the pain that they dealt with when they scraped their knee. And these guys are flying, 10 feet, 20 feet in the air, flipping off of things, landing on tables and stuff. And it's the lack of respect for it oftentimes can make a person more comfortable shunning it a little bit. But I finding it at that time for me was really, really powerful. One of the and what, for today's show we're going to reference some notes because I love the amount of thought you put into the subject. The ironic enjoyment as something camp and genuine love as art are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, that's something that I think about a lot. It kind of ties into what I was saying a moment ago about how there's a common pattern, right, of falling in love with it as a kid, drifting away from it, and then coming back to it. And how nostalgia plays a big role in that. If that nostalgia is not there, that doesn't get you in the door. Once you're in the door, you can fall in love with it all over again for many different reasons. From the outside looking in, if you're not a fan, I think a lot of my friends, for example, that don't watch wrestling, don't know a lot about it, but they are exposed to it through me and they, hear me talk about it. I think it's easy enough for them to see why it would be enjoyable as camp.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's easy for anyone that has a similar sense of humor, a similar, education or outlook on life to look at wrestling and think, it's so fucking silly. How could you not like it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not legitimate sport, and that's cool. It's good that it's not legitimate because it can be so silly and wild and zany and over the top and camp.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's so much more than that too. And I think it's kind of a shame that a lot of people, if they don't have that upbringing with it, they don't have that, those memories, that nostalgia of loving it with your whole heart as the way that, only a child can. If you go back far enough, you believed it was real at a certain point.
Right.
And if you have that foundation, then you can kind of come back to it for the nostalgia, enjoy the campy aspects of it, and retain that.
Mm-hmm.
While also appreciating it as art. I'm not saying people shouldn't make fun of it or laugh at it because the shit's hysterical.
Right.
The campy stuff is some of my favorite stuff. But within the same show, a good show is not going to be all silly. It's not going to be all campy.
Right.
It should have some aspects of that, and then some of it is deadly serious, you know?
And it paints... it really is like, the term they use often is the business.
Yeah.
right? It's the business. And for us growing up before, the cat was out of the bag, and there was always suspicions of it, right? There was always like, okay, but it was treated with such seriousness that really professional wrestling was the same way theater was, right? Is our story, the human story. And oftentimes that story was the hero's journey, or you'd have comedy stories, but it was the theater.
Yeah.
And giving us the opportunity to immerse ourselves in it. So it being campy, and I think that campiness kind of dominates for anybody jumping into it now, because they don't have that old frame where you had that experience of watching it like you watched a movie, where you watch Avengers, and do you get emotional? Not you, but other people watch Avengers or watch their favorite superhero movies and get attached to the characters and attached to the battles and stuff that they'd have. And it just doesn't seem like it's that much different. Do you think for people experiencing wrestling for the first time, how powerful do you think a live performance would be for getting someone aware of all that you can love about it?
That's a really great question. I think it comes back to that foundation. I think if you never watched it as a kid and you go to your first show as an adult, but you're getting the live experience, the live experience will add a lot of texture to it. Seeing it live, I think, helps.
Yeah.
It helps you appreciate a lot more about it. Namely, the crowd.
Yeah.
Being part of a crowd that's that big, seeing people who are coming together. It's almost like you hear people talk about Burning Man or big music festivals, and how it's like, yeah, the shows are great, but what you really remember are these bonds you make with these other people who are also willing to put their lives on hold and invest in something important to them. That's a wrestling crowd to me.
Yeah.
You go to a wrestling show as an adult, having never seen wrestling, and you will notice that.
Yeah.
But it is so silly, and there's so much pageantry, and there's so much context to the stories that are being told. I don't know if you would see more than that on your first viewing.
Okay. I mean, and I had that previous context, but when we went to NXT, which is WWE's a smaller part of the WWE brand.
Developmental.
Yeah. They came out to Portland, and we went to that show because I had been to house show WWE shows, which were less enthusiastic. It wasn't as they
suck. Let's be real. The house shows suck. They're designed to keep the wrestlers from getting rusty and to generate revenue in small towns where they don't televise what's being performed.
Thank you. They suck.
Yeah.
But we went to that NXT show.
Brother.
I get goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah.
You're in a motor center. It's completely sold out. It's just packed. Everybody's there. And the music, the fans, you got people screaming behind you, other people just alive, and everybody's just feeling the energy together. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be cool. And you stand up. And I love wrestling. And everybody just turns around like, fuck yeah, this is great. But that energy just emanated throughout the crowd. In the entire event, I've never had so much fun with all this like positive energy, because we're all engaging in the performance. And I always just wondered if other people got the chance to experience that. I remember Keith Lee, two wrestlers, they're wrestling. Great match. One guy goes over the top, the other guy follows him out. And generally, when two guys are out and there's a table, and I remember I was screaming it, you were probably screaming it, pretty much everybody within in the stadium, really. Throw him through a table! Kill him! And he just holds his finger up to his mouth.
Mm.
And the entire stadium, thousands of raving lunatics, go dead silent. And he takes both of his hands and he slaps the shit out of this guy's chest.
Yeah.
Stadium erupts.
Yeah.
You know, and just the call and response and just the magic of it all was just completely overwhelming for me.
I've seen rock bands in that same venue, actually, in Moda Center, try to quiet a screaming crowd, to do something cool that requires a moment of quiet, right? Don't work the way it does in wrestling. In wrestling, the crowd is conditioned to the call and response.
Right. They're a part of the show.
Yeah, and if a wrestler's really performing well at the top of their game, they can bring the entire audience to silence with one gesture.
Yeah. It's still gives me chills.
Yeah.
And I think we should cover some of our favorite wrestlers as we go on.
Yeah, man.
You know, there actually, if we can just go down your notes, because I'd like to you know, that it's not, wrestling is not legitimate competition. You know, and I don't want it, because these are your words, and I'd like you to be able to give them life.
Yeah. Well, it's what I had mentioned to you earlier is that something that interests me deeply about wrestling is that it is not a legitimate competition, in that we're not seeing two competitors trying to better one another in combat, right?
Right.
It's not a legitimate sport in that way. And so people think that it's not a legitimate competition because it's not a sport. I think it's actually one of the most competitive art forms. It's just, you have to know what to look for, right? These guys are not competitive against each other. It's not one athlete trying to pin another athlete. It's two athletes working together to try to put on the best show.
Right.
And who they're competing against is all the other wrestlers.
Right.
The other wrestlers on the card, meaning the other wrestlers who are going to perform that night, and all the other wrestlers in the world, right? They are all watching each other's stuff. And there's this, you know, unspoken subplot to every wrestling show, which is who's the best.
Yeah. And within a match, you know, I'd listen to a bunch of wrestling podcasts, and I really encourage people to go back and listen to some old wrestling podcasts, because you get the opportunity to really peer into that world. And one of the terms they use is getting over.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get over? And the act, could you educate people a little bit on what goes in? Because I think that does tie into that point, is that wrestlers are trying to get over.
Yeah.
And what does that mean within the context of a match and within the context of a character?
Well, getting over basically just means that the crowd is buying what you're selling. So it's context dependent. If you're a babyface or a hero, then getting over means we love you and we want you to win. If you're a heel or a bad guy, villain, getting over means we fucking hate you and we will pay good money to watch you get your ass kicked. And you know, that term, you know, it's fairly simple, but then from that you get other extensions of it as you discuss the finer points of wrestling. And it's like, sometimes, for example, you'll hear wrestling fans talking about, oh, well, that guy's not over. It's just his song is over.
Mm-hmm.
Or there'll be certain guys that have chants associated with their gimmick, and it's like, oh, that gimmick's getting over.
Right.
For the wrestler to be over, it's got to be like a performer who we're really invested in as they change gimmicks, songs, attire, movesets.
Which is cool, because that's a part of the overall evolution of a character, of that wrestler's performance and where they end up on the card. And one of the things you mentioned about them competing with each other, and one of those metrics is actually drawing money. will people pay to watch you wrestle? Well, if your name is on the marquee, will people come out to watch? How much merchandise do you sell? You know, and how that they may not be competing in the ring, but they are doing whatever they can to get over. And getting over means two different things. And one of the a great example of that is, and I invite anybody to go watch Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. Do you remember what year that was?
Let's see. I want to say that's WrestleMania 13.
Okay.
Which would be 97, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Hell of a great match.
Oh, my God.
For sure.
And Bret Hart, for those of you that know wrestling, if you know wrestling and you don't know who Bret Hart is, shame on you.
Well, I think everybody knows Stone Cold Steve Austin. You know what I mean? Like,
right. And this is where Stone Cold Steve Austin made the transition. He got over being a good guy. And Bret Hart made his transition into being a bad guy. And they did it all with their performance.
In the same match. So another, wrestling term would be a turn. It's like, oh, is this guy going to turn heel? Meaning, is he the hero we've been cheering for? Is he going to do something dastardly to turn in an instant into a bad guy? That would be an example of a turn. A face turn, where you're turning from heel to face. Same thing, but reverse. You do something heroic. We've been booing you, but we're invested in your character. So when you make that heroic act, we get behind you big all at once. And then you got what we have in the Bret versus Stone Cold match, which is what is called a double turn, where the hero and the villain going in swap by the end of the match. That's a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah, that was magic.
Yeah,
that was magic.
Yeah,
it's just so cool. And again, if you give it the opportunity, you get to see the art at work, and then the magic kind of starts to take hold of you. Thinking about the next putting on the best match, which we kind of kicked that off with one of the, and man, there's so many matches. Actually, you have given me a spreadsheet of matches, of awesome wrestling matches. But tell me a little more about putting on the best match.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult concept for non-fans to wrap their heads around, actually. I've brought friends out to wrestling shows, and that can be a sticking point. It's like, the best wrestler in kayfabe, in storyline, is the guy who's beaten everyone else, right? But that's not always the same as the best wrestler in real life, the best performer, right? And then I have friends who look at me and go, oh, what does that mean? What is the difference, right? And the best wrestler is really the guy who can put on the best show. And you can do that any way you can think of that works. That's the beauty of it. Some guys put on the best show because of how athletic they are. Some guys do it with acrobatics. A lot of guys do it with violence. Some guys do it just by taking the biggest risks.
Right.
They're, jumping from tremendous heights, just trying to outdo everybody else and outdo themselves night after night. You have more technical scientific wrestling, which is more about like the proficiency of your body movement, something that I think would appeal to like a combat fighter, All of those are different specialties, A great wrestler can do all of those things, and comedy as well, right? Most wrestlers, stick to their gimmick, whether that's being the violent guy or the funny guy, or this or that. The best wrestlers can do it all, and they can put on the best show in any number of ways. But I think ultimately what ties it all together is being a storyteller. So while you are proving to the audience that you're the strongest, or showing that you're the fastest, showing that you are the craziest, that you're willing to get kicked in the head and get back up the most number of times. As you are doing that, you are also drawing the audience in with a story. You're exchanging offense with your opponent, really your partner.
Mm-hmm.
You're exchanging offense with them in a way that has a beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
The match has a plot.
Right. A physical plot.
Yes, and that's a plot that ideally fits in with the larger context of what each of the two characters have done in the preceding weeks, months, years.
Right. Right. And that we talk like the best storyteller, because I think one thing people get confused about is the best is always the champion. The champion means the best. You compete, everybody competes, and then whoever wins all the matches is the champion, and the champion is the best.
Right.
And oftentimes the title can be used as almost like a multiplier for the popularity of a wrestler. But the best wrestler, you'd see guys that, might not have the title. So at one point, and these are all people I encourage anybody listening to this to just check out. You could check out highlight clips if you could find matches. But, when you talk about the theater, the character, one of the biggest characters of all time, The Undertaker.
Yeah.
And the aura that he had when he came out, the sound of the bell tolling, the darkness, the theater of him coming out and how huge he was in his outfit. Your favorite wrestler, if you elaborate on the best in-ring performer in many people's eyes ever.
Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me he's the GOAT. And what Shawn and Undertaker and other guys who are part of that conversation are the best ever, what they have in common is that they could go out there and tell a story.
Yeah.
Undertaker was more methodical. It's impressive to watch a guy who's 6'10" dive over the top rope, because most guys who are that size simply can't do it. But he's not about acrobatics and athletics. So that they all have their own ways of getting over.
Right. And the stories they would tell would be different with the different guys they wrestled.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you'd have those two forces come together, the mixing of that storytelling would just produce art. And there's so many other guys that you can watch, but I always found that the interplay between Shawn and Undertaker was always just magic.
Yeah, Undertaker's got a really special connection with the crowd because you take our generation, for example. You and me are old enough that the first time we saw Undertaker wrestle, you react differently if you're a kid, right? Because this is a character who's supposed to be dead.
Yeah.
He's a dead man. And, this is a big, burly, very agile, athletic dude. So they could have made a lot of money just trotting him out there as big, tough guy Mark so-and-so.
Yeah.
But instead, he and the creative department there, they took a big swing.
Yeah.
And instead had him play this very out there character who really pushes your threshold in terms of what's the term I'm looking for here? It's your willingness to suspend your disbelief.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did that. And one of the beauty, and again, and they called them top guys, was the guys that believed in their gimmick. And really, back in the days, these guys, if they were in public, they would live their gimmick, right? If they were around other people, they lived it. But as a child, you see this man who's about 6'10", and they called him 7 foot, and he'd come out with an urn, and he had dark makeup on, and his hair was black, and he had the hat, and when he would finish telling you who he was going to destroy, he would roll his eyes in the back of his head and tell you to rest in peace. And you're just, you're just, oh my God. And, even Macho Man Randy Savage, and you think about the name, just the name, Macho Man Randy Savage.
That's pretty good.
It's a great combination of things, because it's like, oh yeah, you know what? I'm a savage. I'm unhinged. Yeah. I could go here and I could talk to you nice and quiet, but I could also go there. I could go anywhere. Yeah. But you know what? I am the best around, the best in town. Yeah. Macho Man coming for you. And he embodied it. He was jacked, but he was erratic, but he was alive. And it was one of the things that made his rivalry with Hulk Hogan, who represented something different than him. All these characters came to life, and just to see these people really do them well.
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of started talking about these specific characters in terms of The Undertaker, and I think what really makes The Undertaker special is his longevity allowed for people to watch him as children, when you can be legitimately scared by this dude, like, his opponents in the ring talking shit, this, that, and you don't see Undertaker come storming down the aisle. Mm-mm. You don't hear the announcer say, and now the man you're going to be wrestling, The Undertaker. No. What you see is darkness, right?
Yeah.
He's talking, he's cutting his promo in the ring, and everything goes dark, right?
Yeah.
And the fans immediately lose their shit because they know what's coming next, which is the gong of The Undertaker's music.
Yeah.
And his character's mystical. He's got powers, so you never know what's going to happen next. He could pop up in the middle of the ring. He could pop up in the rafters. He could, he could do anything, really. And we were buying it all because we loved him. And then cut to 20 years later. We're grown men now. And we have so much respect for all the years that we've watched him portray this character, that now we're just as emotionally invested for different reasons. It's like we're not children anymore, so we can't believe that in the character of a dead man.
Right.
We believe in something more powerful, which is a real man who gave his life to this shit.
Right.
A man who could have made a lot more money by doing interviews and going out there and self-promoting, but because he was portraying a dead man, he was not in the public eye. He was living the gimmick.
Which is so funny, because when I think, the podcast's name is The Mark of Men. What a manly thing to do. Seriously, to give your life to something, do so with such integrity that you're willing, and granted, he made a ton of money, but to forego easier opportunities because you made a life choice and you committed to that. Yeah. And that's something that the respect that everyone has for him, not only the fans, but also other wrestlers, it speaks for itself. So, when I think of the mark of a man, it's Undertaker ranks, among the top men of all time. And he was a performer.
You mentioned Macho Man. I was just reading the other day that I don't think I ever knew this before, but when Macho Man and his real wife, Miss Elizabeth, was, also his wife on the show, they split up. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a work of fiction.
Right.
But because Macho Man was giving his life to art, he went and filed a legal separation from his real life wife.
Are you serious?
Oh. Can you imagine having that conversation with your wife?
Listen, honey, Elizabeth, I know that I love you, but this is the business.
Yeah.
And nothing else matters. So we're going to have to get a real separation. I'll see you at home. But we can't be seen in public together. So we're going to have to eat TV dinners on Saturdays. It's
fucking crazy, right?
It's why he did that?
He did, yeah.
That's so even if the performance, you can't get into it right away, you can't help but respect the dedication. It's that story is going to resonate with me for the rest of my days. So, you kind of covered the second note, but with the evolution of wrestling and seeing, seeing inclusion incorporated it, and is it heterogeny?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seeing how wrestling has evolved, what explain how inclusion like plays a role in all that, because it's fascinating, because now wrestling went through many changes over the years, right? From the plumber and the hillbillies and the different characters to more nuanced characters of the Attitude Era, but all kind of renegades in one way or another. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, you can really see when you talk to non-fans about wrestling, you can really see quickly how Vince McMahon's monopoly of the business, it made his company WWE synonymous with wrestling, which is not a good thing.
Right.
It's not. And one of the many things that's problematic about that is that a lot of adults our age, their only memories of pro wrestling are what they've seen from his programming.
Right.
And he's a weird, idiosyncratic, crazy, misogynist old fuck.
Right.
And so for the whims of this weirdo to dictate what an entire generation thinks of this art form,
right,
it sucks, because if you watched wrestling in the late 90s, you were watching his product,
right,
in all likelihood. And
well, in the late 90s, it was between him and then Ted Turner's company.
That's true. There were competitors in the late 90s, and he eventually squashed them the way he had squashed so many earlier smaller companies. And what we're left with is an artistic landscape in which there's only one artist's vision.
Right.
And if you're in your 30s and you don't watch wrestling, when I say pro wrestling, what first pops into your head is probably something that originated in the head of Vince McMahon.
Right.
And you may well have very justifiably, you may have rightfully determined, this is not for me.
Right.
what I'm seeing is not for me.
Right.
It's fill in the blanks. It's too it's misogynist.
Yeah.
It's too violent. It's lowbrow.
Yeah.
Talks down to its audience.
Hokey. It was, and at one point, they all almost felt the same. A lot of the stories they were telling. Yeah.
And important distinction to make, something that I would try to communicate to anyone that's not a fan, is that not all wrestling is like that.
Right.
And what we're starting to see now is another wave of dissenting voices.
Right.
There are other companies now. There are options. The internet's a big part of that. But you also have companies like New Japan Pro Wrestling and AEW here in the States that are giving people an alternative to WWE. And it is a stark contrast, to say the least.
It really is. And that's been one of the beautiful things. So, when Vince was kind of ruling the roost for so many years, is one of the reasons I kind of pulled out.
Likewise.
His storytelling just wasn't resonating with me. And then when NXT came around, that developmental league, and Triple H kind of produced a different vision, and I was able to kind of be pulled back in. And the internet exposed me to New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Yeah.
And the way they tell their stories, and the way they do their matches, and all of it, I just fell in love with it. With some of the matches that I get to see, and granted, I didn't get to watch a lot because I didn't really know where to find it. But then for AEW to emerge from the mist, and then all of a sudden we get to have knockdown, drag out, fantastic matches all the time. And, there's one company I'd like to kind of give a shout out to, because a lot of my favorite female wrestlers came from Stardom.
Yeah.
And those women, they weren't reduced to objects, in terms of, they were not reduced to just sex objects. these women were putting down some of the most fantastic matches I had ever seen. And actually NXT did this as well with the 4 horsewomen.
Yeah.
So what Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, Charlotte Flair, and Bayley, you know,
Changed the game.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I'm sure you remember that when those 4 were coming up through developmental, one of the common chants you would hear from the audience while they were having these incredible matches, you would just hear the fans spontaneously burst into this chant of women's wrestling.
Yeah.
Chanting for women's wrestling as if to say, you know, Vince McMahon, maybe the models that you used to trot out here were fun for us to look at as preteen boys.
Yeah.
But we're grown now, and we would like to see some performers and athletes, and we know that's not a group that's limited to men.
Yeah. And for me personally, you know, like I love that there's inclusion. I love that there's representation. I like that we have different body types, different wrestlers, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, even now having different sexual orientations as well.
Oh yeah.
It's nice to have it all represented. And one of the things is that I do not personally enjoy diversity for diversity's sake. I enjoy when diversity is included and respected because you know what? People that were willing to do it right came in and you make room for them and just watch the magic happen. And I remember what the Bayley and Sasha Banks match at NXT TakeOver.
Brooklyn.
Still one of my favorite wrestling matches ever.
Mm-hmm.
And
likewise.
I encourage anybody who has an inkling for wrestling to watch that entire show because it's absolutely phenomenal. But I watched 2 women put on one of the most spectacular performances. Not only a hard-hitting match, but they told an absolutely magnificent story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a lot of different things in that match. You get surprises, you get innovation, spots and sequences that hadn't been done before, clever twists and turns. You get both women showing that they're very athletic, both women having a chance to show some creativity. And then one of the things I think about a lot when I think about that match is the aftermath.
Yeah.
Because they were both so emotional.
Yeah.
Which made me emotional as a fan. And you see them bringing in Becky and Charlotte, people who, if they're in character, they shouldn't be out there in that ring. But they came out anyway because it was a moment that transcended the on-screen plot line. It was about women kind of taking a piece of the business for themselves.
Right.
And it wasn't long after that you started seeing occasionally a women's match would be the main event.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but when it was merited.
Yeah. And when it was merited, it was definitely merited.
Yeah, and one thing I started to notice around that time is girls in the stands. I'm not talking about women. I'm talking about little girls.
Mm-hmm.
And that shit makes me so emotional, dude. Because when I see little girls in the front row, and you can see that they're falling in love with wrestling, right? You can watch the way they're engaging with the product. They're losing their minds. It's the same way it's the same look I had in my eye when I was there watching Shawn Michaels,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but they're watching someone that looks like them.
Yeah.
Dude, I get choked up just talking about it. It's like, because when we were kids, wrestling was just for us. It was for boys, and girls didn't get it.
Yeah.
Because it was not something that was ever presented to them.
They were not given anything to love about it.
They were not included. If you were a little girl watching wrestling, and again, this comes back to Vince McMahon's monopoly, you probably were watching WWF. And if you were watching WWF at that time as a little girl, the message was pretty clear that if you wanted to be part of that show, it was as eye candy.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had some great characters, some great female characters in the 80s and 90s.
And not to discount them, because there's nothing wrong with eye candy. It's just that not everybody is eye candy.
Right.
Not every woman is eye candy.
That shouldn't be your only ticket to the show.
It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you're awesome, there should be space for you.
Yeah.
To make some noise, because you know what? The only thing that happens is everybody benefits.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the aspects that we haven't talked about yet, and I want to leave people with some specifics, because, you know, a very easy way to get started in loving pro wrestling is to enjoy a good promo.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked as much about that for sure.
No, you know, and the thing is watch a match. Go watch a match. Yeah, sure. But before you watch a match, find a promo. You know, one of the and I'd like us to go back and forth, because I think we both have some promos that we'd like to recommend. If you'd like to watch, I forget who he was fighting, but Macho Man Randy Savage, cream of the crop. That's one of the promos that should be on your introduction to wrestling list. What's one that you have?
Well, cream of the crop is very indicative of a 1980s style of promo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it was a lot of intensity, right?
Yeah.
A lot of screaming.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love that. I would also recommend something a little bit more emblematic of a modern promo.
Mm-hmm.
First one that comes to mind would be CM Punk's pipe bomb promo.
One of the that now you're talking about the pipe bomb when he was at WWE.
Correct.
Okay. Because CM Punk's return to AEW, return to wrestling. So he had left WWE. Mm-hmm. He had left wrestling for years.
Mm-hmm.
His return promo in AEW was also absolute magic.
Yeah, another guy who's sacrificed so much for the art form, but as fans, I think we love him knowing that he's pretty limited as an athlete.
Yeah.
He's athletic enough to go out and get in the octagon on a whim, right?
Yeah.
And much older than most guys step in there.
Yeah.
And, you know, put in a position where as a celebrity, he was fighting guys that were really above his class, I think. So he got his ass whipped.
Yeah.
But even not comparing him to cage fighters, but comparing him to other pro wrestlers. Yeah. Limited as an athlete, we loved him because what he could do on the microphone.
Yeah.
He painted a vivid picture as a character of nuance and someone who kind of represented those of us who felt a little condescended to by the earlier Vince McMahon iterations of wrestling.
I agree wholeheartedly. You know, some of the other notable old promo, and I like that you brought kind of the future promo, because MJF, current wrestler, he has some absolute awesome promos, and honestly, you can watch him in anything, and he delivers that old school heel essence. What are some other notable promos you'd like to give people that if they had a chance to take a look at?
You can't go wrong with MJF because you know, I think he's a modern guy. I think even now he's only 25, something like that. So he can't be older than 24, 25. And so he exists in this wrestling landscape where a lot of times the heels don't get booed. It's their job to get booed.
But they don't get booed.
But they get by anyway because as a good heel, we recognize their skill and we cheer them because it's fun to cheer for guys you like, right?
Yeah.
And then here comes MJF, who's so good that even though his genius is apparent, he still knows exactly what to say to get us to boo him.
Yeah.
And make that fun again. It makes me feel like a little kid, man. So
I know it.
Yeah, any MJF promo, you can't go wrong. And I think AJ Lee, she had some really incredible promos. She was in WWE, and I'm trying to think of maybe like some keywords. She had, a lot of people called it her own pipe bomb, and it was basically her. Normally you cut a promo and you're promoting a match against a specific opponent. She came out there and cut a promo against the entire women's division.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's because they were promoting Total Divas, this reality show. Again, much more recent, but still not quite taking the women's wrestling super seriously. Where
Right.
they're promoting their reality show, and here comes AJ, and she's talking about how, I'm not on the reality show. I'm the only one out here that's putting in the work. I'm actually carrying this division, and she just cuts them down one at a time.
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah.
When I think of some of the and there isn't a specific promo, but I know a lot of people follow The Rock's movies, and you cannot, and The Rock means cannot, go wrong watching a promo from The Rock. And one that specifically comes to mind, and one of the things that he had a particular gift with, was belittling his opponents.
Yeah.
And the promo, and you could just type it in, The Rock promo Billy Gunn. And he absolutely eviscerates his opponent. But when you see his ability to call to the crowd, to have the crowd respond.
You got a special connection with the crowd, that guy.
Never. And I remember they do backstage interviews.
Yeah.
And he'd be, The Rock came in to Alabama and the millions, and he'd just look at the sky. And the entire crowd would just say, and millions. And you just hear thousands of people in the arena screaming it for him. The Rock had just a special gift for promos.
Yeah.
That really, you can't help but just get that big event vibe from him.
Let me give you one more. I'm
Cool.
sure you'll remember this one. I think you don't have to be a wrestling fan to appreciate this. Daniel Bryan, now performing under his real name, I believe, Bryan Danielson. This is a guy who has given so much to the business, and so the best moments in wrestling are when real life kind of pushes its way into the story, right? So Bryan Danielson's a guy who had so many neck injuries and concussions from the incredibly hard-hitting style that he wrestled. His unwillingness to take it slow or go easy at any time, it caught up with him. This is a guy who once wrestled a 5-star match with a detached retina. So this guy's toughness is beyond reproach, right? Eventually, all these injuries catch up with him, and he's got to retire. His retirement promo was very moving, and it was heartbreaking. But medical science has come a long way, and eventually he did get cleared to come back. And he cut this promo where kind of the tagline was, if you fight for your dreams will fight for you. And to hear a character say that is one thing, but to hear a man say it, who's portraying a character that has, it's become who he is, right? It has dictated his ability to be a family man, right? He's given his body to it. And to see him fight in real life for his dream of coming back to pro wrestling and get it, and then use that as an opportunity to inspire others, it's hard to beat that.
that was his AEW promo, wasn't it?
I'm talking WWE here.
Oh, so okay.
Yeah.
So both promos were in WWE.
Well,
because the return one, I thought, or is this a different?
He's do-si-do'd a couple of times. He's had to get second opinions from doctors. So he retired. I believe it was in Seattle. He cut a really heartbreaking promo when he had to retire. Then a couple of years later, it was the one I'm talking about, when he came back to WWE.
Okay.
And Danielson, another guy who kind of represents people who wanted more from wrestling, I think, than Vince McMahon was willing to give at the time. So eventually he made his way to AEW.
Nice. And
he's cut a lot of incredible promos since joining AEW that felt very real, because they were based on the real life decision of a man who was working for his father-in-law and gave up a lot of money to come and perform somewhere where he felt it was being presented as more of an art form and something he could really put his whole heart into.
Well, that's, that real life kind of dovetailing into the character.
Yeah.
And granted, I'm going back again, but, one of the things that made Stone Cold Steve Austin so compelling was that, Stone Cold was released by WCW and told that he wasn't going to be that top guy, and that rebellious spirit that he had, that he embodied, that he performed with, came through in his promos. So that when he spoke, everybody listened, because he didn't possess the same type of charisma that The Rock had. But the thing is that spirit that he had, that, I'm not doing what you're going to tell me. I'm not going to be this stiff. I'm not going to be this stiff. You don't tell Stone Cold what to do. Stone Cold will stomp a mud hole in your ass and walk it dry, because Stone Cold's going to drink beer, whoop ass, and get on out of here. And you're just like, oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
And if and then he's just, he was another one that when he called, you responded because he spoke from his heart, and it connected with the hearts of us all.
Yeah.
And he just gave you a big fuck you to the man. And every time he came out and he just threw his hands in the air, everyone would go crazy.
It was almost like his whole gimmick was fuck you.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, you don't tell Stone Cold what to do. If you want Stone Cold to whoop Vince McMahon's ass, give me a hell yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Eventually, he kind of brings the fans into it. But when he first became a babyface or a good guy, it was kind of because he wasn't really paying us much attention. He was really just more about telling his boss to fuck off.
Yeah.
And beating the ass of anyone that got in his way.
Yeah.
And so it was a departure from the earlier heroes who were talking directly to us as fans, saying, hey, I'm going to fight for you, say your prayers and take your medicine.
Yeah. And it was a total departure from that. He wasn't catering to what everybody told you should love.
It was a show don't tell version of babyface.
And it's like, listen, and you think about the fierce independent spirit of America. And it's like, listen, I'm not doing shit. You think I'm going to wear this stupid tie? You think you're going to have Stone Cold taking these stupid pictures? Oh, hell no. Rips it off. He's got his jeans on. He's got his shirt. He's drinking beers in the middle of the ring. And he was something that always resonated with me personally. Because, there's a lot of times where it's like, well, you should say this or you should be this way. Like, you know what? No, I'm not doing what the hell you tell me. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Easy character to relate to.
Yeah.
An important distinction here, Mike. I just want to say that as fondly as everybody remembers that character and as great as he was at portraying it, it would not have mattered if he couldn't wrestle.
No.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, dude. There wasn't here's the thing. We mentioned Shawn Michaels' athleticism and the dynamics of the way he wrestled his matches. Undertaker, the powerful plotting, Mankind, Mick Foley, the amount of damage he'd do to his body, bring it forward. Even though CM Punk didn't have the athleticism, he wrestled in a style that matched his character.
Psychology.
Bryan Danielson and the hard-hitting technicality that he brought to it. The character of Stone Cold that we just mentioned to you and the way he portrayed his character. Match would start. He storms into the ring and he gets to going, and he would put on a match that had the same exact intensity that the way he talked, that the way he presented himself did. And it wouldn't, all the words you could put out, if you couldn't wrestle a lick, it wouldn't have mattered. And that's one of the things I appreciate, is that not only do these guys have to be great characters, but they have to be great in the ring. And being great in the ring means a lot of different things.
Yeah, he knew how to tell a compelling story out there. As much as we all loved watching the Stone Cold character, drag the belt around and, guzzle beer and flip his boss the bird. What really made him special and made that more impactful was the fact that a Stone Cold Steve Austin match didn't just involve him pretending to punch someone until they were down for the count.
Yeah.
No, it was a back and forth. It was, look for major plot points in the match, turning points, momentum shifts, because there's an emotional arc to that.
Yeah, and he would sell. He would take a beating, and when he came back, everyone, he would come up and they'd put him back down, and he'd come up and they'd put him back down, and then they'd beat him down, and then when the time was right in the match, he would start coming, and then he'd pull the first few rows, and he'd start coming more, and he'd just pull the entire crowd with him as he seized the match from the jaws of defeat. It was always a magical thing, and I cannot stress enough to anybody. There's a lot of things you could be watching. Professional wrestling should be one of them.
Yeah, give it a try at least, because it is unlike anything else. It is fiction blending with nonfiction in such a special way that you will not get from television or films or stand-up comedy or stunt performers. It's elements of all that, and yet it's something completely different.
Thank God for wrestling.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Anytime, bro. Anytime.
Wrestling for life. Have a good night.